the pharmaceutical company that provided this MDMA for the experiments was like, oh, no way. That was not us. Like, that's on y'all.
Yeah, true. Yeah. The meth came from somewhere. It didn't just appear.
Exactly. I mean, they had the meth in the lab because they were doing all kinds of experiments on illicit drugs, but meth doesn't just jump into an MDMA bottle. That's not how. Yeah.
Wow. All right. So we had first of all, good on them for the retraction, right? It's very hard for somebody to fall on their sword and go. All right, folks, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome aboard the Max Afterburner podcast, powered by the No Fallen Heroes Foundation, the No Fallen Heroes Project. I am extremely fired up for the very special guest that we have today. I'll introduce in a couple minutes, especially because it's a God moment because of the incredible news that happened yesterday. So we'll get that in a second. Hey, make sure this coming week, head to go.topgunoptions.com/launch FT. That's launch full throttle. I'm going to be opening up the doors at Top Gun Options to our trading squadron. And if you want to come in for a week and kind of check out what we do with everything going on in Washington, potential, government shutdown, oh darn, and what could happen in the market, come next week and check out what we do at Top Gun Options. Go.topgunoptions.com/launch FT. All right, let's go ahead and get airborne. Folks, first of all, I can read. I was a political science major, Navy guy from South Jersey, so I can read. This has got to be one of the best books that I've read. And look at you see all these yellow stickies. So I actually prepared for this, Rachel. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Rachel Nuwer, 500-pound head in the space. And that's obviously a compliment. New York Times, Nat Geo, Scientific American, a fellow, what was it? The Ferris Scholarship, right?
Yeah. UC Berkeley, Ferris, like psychedelic journalism scholarship. It's a mouthful.
Wow. So congratulations. So welcome aboard. We are so glad to have you.
Super excited to be here. Thank you.
So folks, this is called I Feel Love. And a buddy of mine in the healing psychedelic space is like, dude, you gotta, it's a must read. It's the Bible for MDMA. So of course I Google it and Donna Summer comes up. So it's I Feel Love, MDMA and the Quest for Connection in a Fractured World. Listen to me. How to Change Your Mind, epic. The Immortality Key, epic. I Feel Love, epic. If you are interested in the healing space and learning the history, the ins and outs, the ones and zeros, the beaker and the booger eater type of stuff, all of these books are incredibly researched and well thought out. So, Rachel, this is a masterpiece. Congratulations on
Thank
this.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So the history is fantastic because, ladies and gentlemen, before we get even into MDMA, as soon as I said the word MDMA, 99% of you just went, what? Holes in the brain, and all sorts of crazy stuff that we were lied to about. So Rachel digs into the history, finds where all the bodies are buried, and puts this really this narrative together. So again, congratulations. Read this. I've given it to my wife Susie. She's going through it right now, but we're gonna step through this. So congratulations on that. This is a God moment, like I said, Rachel. Yesterday, MAPS, good old Rick Doblin and the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Science, second phase 3 trial. They did a phase 3 trial and 67%. This is shocking to me, Rachel. 67% in that first study. And didn't they use these people were non-treatable? Who were the people in the first one? How did they define them?
Yeah, the people in the first phase 3 study were all people who had severe post-traumatic stress disorder. So, these are really like the most intractable seeming cases that you can possibly have. Mm-hmm. And they actually selected that group on purpose because they wanted to just kind of go for it and see, okay, is this treatment effective for the quote unquote hardest cases there possibly are. Mm-hmm. And, the new study kind of relaxed that, and they have severe PTSD, but they also have moderate cases, which is really important for showing it can be applicable for a whole range of cases.
Yeah, and that's what I heard. They said they used the word diverse, right? Like this study, this phase 3 was a little more diverse than the other one. But folks, let me lay this on you. these were people with non-treatable PTS. I mean, the word, again, political science major from South Jersey, non-treatable means you can't treat it. 67% of these people showed they were clinically healed, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of the people I talked to said, I'm not like cured, whatever that means, but, their life is profoundly changed. Like they're able to operate in the world and, be themselves again and have relationships with people and, do what they want to do without having this terrible diagnosis hold them back.
Well, and I'm glad you said that because, healed is relative, right? Some of these people were like, hey, They are able to look at what that trauma was from a different perspective. And we'll dig into that a little bit. But let's fast forward. So 67% of these people in that study said, I feel great. 71, and this was published. You can Google it. This was published yesterday in Nature Medicine. You can read the full thing or you can read the Cliff Notes. 71%. So it went up. 71% no longer qualify as diagnosed as PTS. That's just that's incredible. And 86.5% had a quote meaningful reduction in severity. Now, you and I'm going to pick your brain on the whole, speaking of holes in the brain. This study said no deaths and no serious adverse effects, right?
Yeah, I mean, there were some adverse effects. So a few people, I think 3 people did experience suicidal ideation over the course of the study. Interestingly enough, they were in both the MDMA group and the placebo group. Which,
yes.
Exactly, which suggests that it's not like something about MDMA that's bringing these feelings on. It's, it's digging into really, really difficult feelings and really difficult memories that's probably stirring it up. But fortunately, nobody did attempt suicide during the study. So that was really great. And there were also some issues with heart palpitations for a few people. And again, both groups, I think people get really nervous doing this. So that just indicates that if you have heart issues, or perhaps if you're an older individual, you should talk to a cardiologist before you try it. But, nothing severely adverse happened. Everybody was fine.
Okay. So folks, this is just, it's incredible news. Obviously no fallen heroes. We're putting the ladder down to help heal veterans and first responders and their family members, but this can help everybody. So let's back up a little bit because we have to talk through some of the history. Because again, I think my history with MDMA is anecdotal. Like, hey, it was legal up until 1985 when some unelected bureaucrat in the Reagan administration, with the stroke of a pen, he's like Dean Wormer in Animal House. No more fun of any kind, right? So talk us through that history, because and you do a great job in the book, from whether it's Great Britain or the Dallas folks, very well put together. And it's funny because whether it was, I think it was the Brit guy, it's one of my yellow stickies here. It was kind of like this in America. We have this like puritanical mindset of you can't do something and have fun, right? So talk to us a little bit about
no fun here. Like that's not allowed. Yeah, not good.
Give us a little history in our country of MDMA and why, Republicans decided one day we're not allowed to have fun in this country.
Yeah. Well, MDMA's story actually begins outside of the U.S. in 1912 when the German pharmaceutical company Merck submitted a patent for MDMA, and they weren't looking for MDMA.
Yeah.
They were looking for like a blood clotting agent, and MDMA was this chemical intermediary. We don't know if Merck discovered the psychoactive properties of MDMA. They're very cagey about it, and they actually declined an interview request from me. So, that's a mystery for the future. Fast forward to the 1950s. This is when MDMA first appeared in literature in the United States. And unfortunately, this was associated with a particularly shameful and unethical chapter in U.S. history. It was when both the CIA and the U.S. Army were engaging in these mind control experiments, oftentimes without, military members' consent, without the U.S. public's consent. So MDMA was one of the substances we know from Army documents that the Army was investigating. What we do not know for sure is whether it was actually ever given to a person by the U.S. Army. I found this doctoral student at the University of Michigan. His name is Nicholas Denome, and he's like absolutely obsessed with this question. And he has gotten really far with the Freedom of Information Act requests with the Army. And he finally found a citation that looks like it could be the smoking gun to prove whether or not this happened. And it traces back to Tulane University, which was doing experiments on humans on the Army's behalf. But when he asked for that document, the US government said they couldn't find it.
Oh my gosh.
Extremely fishy. Like, I'm not usually one for conspiracy theories, but it just like, it's very fishy. But I think it's important to acknowledge that it is possible that the first person on U.S. soil to ever be given MDMA was done so by the Army against, without their consent. So, yeah, a little bit messed up.
Wow.
Fast forward a little bit further, we're now in the 1970s, and this is when MDMA really began to come into its own. A psychedelic chemist in the Bay Area, really famous and notable guy, in the psychedelics community. Some of your listeners probably heard of him, Alexander Shulgin.
Yeah.
He tried MDMA. He had resynthesized it with one of his students, and he was just really impressed with what he felt. He compared it to a low-calorie martini because, he fully was in control of himself. He could have a conversation and be charming, but he was still a little bit altered. But the word that kept popping into Shulgin's head during this experience was window. He felt like it opened him up and let him lower his defenses, speak freely, say the things that perhaps normally we don't say because of, we're stressed about how people perceive us because of baggage from past relationships. So Shulgin wound up introducing MDMA to a friend of his, a therapist named Leo Zeff. It's kind of a funny story because Leo was like literally retiring. He was packing up his office, and Shulgin, his old buddy, shows up with like basically these drugs and is like, "Hey, you need to try this." And Leo's like, "No. I'm done with that. I'm retiring. I'm going to enjoy my quiet life." And a couple days later, Shulgin's phone rings, and it's the therapist, Leo Zeff, and he's like, "I'm coming out of retirement. I have work to do." Leo wound up being sort of the Johnny Appleseed of MDMA in the therapeutic community. He trained, like hundreds of therapists in the Bay Area, in the US, even in Europe, to use this molecule as a therapeutic adjunct. And, it was basically a catalyst for any type of therapy you can think of, whether it's for trauma, for couples counseling, or just for sort of self-discovery. So that's kind of how MDMA became a therapeutic agent.
Well, it's incredible. Folks, listen to this. This didn't start as, hey, let's just take some drugs. This
Absolutely
thing
not.
is helping people in a therapeutic session. This is take it and let's talk. This isn't take it and good luck, blast off. This was to help people. This isn't, so it was used initially for therapeutic use, right? And then just like we talk about with LSD, the famous sentence is, it escaped from the lab, right?
Yes.
It sounds
from the
like
therapist's couch into the dance floor. Exactly.
Yeah. And it sounds like a lot of the folks in the Bay Area kind of were worried about that, right? They're like, wow, this stuff let's use our brains and be good about it. If it escapes and Uncle Sam gets wind of it, we're all going to get clipped. So talk us through the explosion and the knee-jerk reaction.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you summarized it really well. It's a drug that, unless you're doing really hard work on your trauma, it makes you feel good, physically and mentally. So it was sort of inevitable that it would find its way to the recreational community. And everybody knew that, but everybody in the therapeutic community had also seen what happened just a few years before with LSD, being criminalized. LSD, as I'm sure your listeners are aware, was used widely in the 50s as a therapeutic adjunct. Something like 40,000 people had LSD-assisted therapy, and then it was criminalized. So the MDMA therapists really didn't want this to happen to MDMA because they saw how useful it was. But inevitably, it did make that jump. There were people who started selling it on a commercial basis, and in fact, of all the places, Dallas became a hub for MDMA use, legal MDMA use at a place called the Start Club. Yeah. Which honestly, if I could travel back in time, it might be to the Start Club. It looks like an amazing party. But like everyone from like Tom Cruise to George W. Bush would go there to party. And the lubricant that like brought the magic to the Start floor dance floor wasn't alcohol, it was MDMA. Yes. It was all hugs and love. But inevitably that scene caught the attention of regulators and the DEA. And there was, as you said, this knee-jerk reaction, like, we have to shut this down. It's a new drug, dangerous. Everyone's using it. What's happening?
Yep.
And one thing that I think is really important to point out is that the therapists didn't just go quietly along with this decision. They actually rallied together and put together a court case against the DEA to try to show them that MDMA should be placed into a lower schedule that would permit its medical use and permit research. Yeah, exactly. Let's regulate it, sure, but let's also not shut the door for helping people.
Yeah.
And incredibly, they actually won that case. Yep. But because this was an administrative law case, judge. I'm not a legal expert. Yeah, it was just the judgment was just an opinion. It wasn't binding. So the DEA was screw you guys. We're going to do what we wanted to do the entire time, which is place it on Schedule 1 and ban its use.
So, folks, you all are 99.9% of you are familiar with this, but let's just do a quick review. A Schedule 1 drug, the definition of a Schedule 1 drug in this country is no therapeutic use and a high risk of addiction. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the actual definition of a cigarette and alcohol. They're not therapeutic and they will kill you. So typical DEA, that, MDMA is illegal. It's therapeutic use. It's not too addictive, which we'll get into because you don't want to do it. You don't want to do it all the time because you have a little bit of serotonin letdown, all that stuff we can get into. But folks, leave it to Uncle Sam. This thing helps people. People are having fun. Schedule 1 drug. But here's the alcohol and here's the booze. Knock yourself out. So an administrative law judge in the administration said, no, I agree with this. And then DEA on its own said, nope, size 12 government boots. We're going to do what we want. So they didn't even go, what is it, Schedule 2 or 3? It went Schedule
they were
1.
Hard stop. This is so sad, but also telling. The law judge at the time made a statement and he said, I just want to make sure that we don't look back on this decision-making process in this time. And it's the medieval witch trials, which is exactly what happened.
That's exactly.
So telling.
Yeah, that judge nailed it. That judge knew what was going on. Having all these Bay Area therapists and having people testify hey, this saved my life. Nope. Doesn't matter.
Legitimate doctors from Harvard as well were just,
Exactly.
Okay, anyway.
So enter the picture. One of the nicest guys on the face of the planet, Rick Doblin, just was not going to let this stand. One of the most incredible human being, nicest guy in the world, but one of the man was singularly focused that the government was wrong. This is literally a David versus Goliath story. You were you at MAPS or Psych Science a couple months ago?
Yep, sure was.
Well, I'll meet you next year then. But so
awesome. Yeah, it was a wild
Science a couple of years ago was 2,000-3,000 people in Rick Doblin. When Rachel and I were out there, it was 10, 12, 13,000.
Yeah, something like that. It was so overwhelmingly
unbelievable.
Wow.
Athletes, veterans, authors, hippies, an eclectic group, all aligned to the same energy. But so Rick Doblin's mission objective was, hey, the government's wrong and I'm going to prove it. This stuff should be legal for therapeutic use. Talk to us about some of the studies, because if you're sitting here going, does not compute, holes in brain, folks, you're going to be blown away. One of these, and I'll let you tell the full story, but folks, one of these studies, instead of giving the mice MDMA, they gave the mice meth. So I have so many questions, Rachel. First of all, how do you get meth into a lab to give instead of MDMA? And did somebody do that on purpose to sabotage? Tell us about some of the
interesting thoughts.
I think Big Pharma or somebody might, hey man, go give the rats this to skew the test. Yeah. How can that be a mistake? How can you mistakenly give in scientific experiment rats meth instead of MDMA? Talk to us about some of the studies.
I really wish that I could have asked the study authors that question, but they would not return my emails.
Okay.
Anyway, I guess back up a step. Oh, just a little footnote. It was actually monkeys, not mice. So it's even worse.
Oh, wow. That's right.
Or primates. Oh, my God. Yeah. It's even worse. Okay. So the 1990s became basically a big witch hunt for MDMA neurotoxicity. Mm-hmm. Labs were getting millions of dollars from the federal government to quote unquote prove that MDMA was neurotoxic. That is, that it damages our neurons, the cells in our brain that, are pretty important. So there were labs that were really just focusing on only this question. There's no other research going on how MDMA might help people or, how it's used among recreational people. No, just how is MDMA going to, destroy our brains? And that is where there was one primary lab at Johns Hopkins University. And that was really like the place that was focused on this question and pumping out results, such as the one that led to the erroneous MDMA eats holes in your brain claim.
Jesus.
So yeah, I mean, they would make statements like, taking MDMA is like playing Russian roulette.
Yes.
And, and meanwhile, MDMA, and we can talk about this later, can be a dangerous drug, but it's really not one of the most, water can be dangerous. It's not one of the most dangerous illicit drugs out there. And relatively speaking to the number of people who take it, there are just like very, very few deaths in ER visits. Yet, it was pumped up as this killer drug that's just, wreaking havoc in our teens. Anyway, in the early aughts, a paper came out of this same Johns Hopkins lab, and the results were really stunning. It was on dopamine systems, which was really weird because anyone who's ever written about it, studied MDMA or written anything or read anything about it knows that MDMA primarily acts on serotonin, correct, which is a different neurotransmitter, not dopamine. But suddenly here was this crazy result with dopamine. They'd given some monkeys, quote unquote MDMA. And suddenly, like, some of these animals literally just dropped dead. Some of them had seizures. And when they did autopsies on their brains, they found all this dopamine damage, which the implication is that all these poor young ravers are going to come down with Parkinson's pretty soon. So this study was published in Science, which is one of the most prestigious scientific journals out there. And a lot of people pushed back and was like, WTF, what is this result? It's only a few monkeys. Like, did you guys look deeper into this? Shouldn't this raise some alarm bells? Yeah. Because it's just such a weird result. It should give anyone pause. Well, as you said, lo and behold, it turns out they had given those poor monkeys meth instead of MDMA. They issued a retraction for the study. And why or how this happened was never resolved. It's just, again, one of these mysteries for the ages. But I did talk to a neuroscientist who's, been involved in the field for a long time, not that lab, but he thinks that probably a lab technician stole the MDMA and replaced it with meth. And whether this is because whether this is because that tech wanted to just have the MDMA or because the tech was actually sabotaging his or her boss. Wow. We don't know. I mean, it's just a hypothesis, but it seems like the most likely because the pharmaceutical company that provided this MDMA for the experiments was like, oh, no way. That was not us. Like, that's on y'all.
Yeah, true. Yeah. The meth came from somewhere. It didn't just appear.
Exactly. I mean, they had the meth in the lab because they were doing all kinds of experiments on illicit drugs, but meth doesn't just jump into an MDMA bottle. That's not how. Yeah.
Wow. All right. So we had first of all, good on them for the retraction, right? It's very hard for somebody to fall on their sword and go. But I got to be honest with you. So we'll fast forward a little bit and let's backtrack. In 2017, the FDA gave MDMA breakthrough therapy status, which is insane. Why is it insane? Because it's 2023 today. And as Rachel, as you document in your book, this was a great analogy. 1929, penicillin saved a bunch of our servicemen in 1944 and World War II. They didn't figure it out until 1965. It was one of these things. Just a quick tangent for you, Rachel. When I flew the F-18 Hornet, the flight control system is so complex that when I went to the first day of lectures, I read the book. I'm like, oh my God, I don't understand this. I cannot fathom this. The flight instructor walked in and he went up to the whiteboard and he took a marker and he drew a big circle and he pushed it with his hand on the on the whiteboard.
Oh my gosh.
And he goes, you all want to know how the F-18 flight control system works? And we're like, yeah. He's like, you push the I believe button. Now let's go to the officers.
Nice.
Let's go to the officers club and drink the rest of the afternoon. He's like, I don't know how it works either. So it's funny.
Wow. That's a great analogy.
Yeah. But with penicillin, they're like, we're going to use this thing because it's clearly working.
Yeah.
And then, 20, 30, 40, or almost 40 years later, they're like, aha. So
this is why. Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like with MDMA. So we got breakthrough status in 2017, but let's rewind a little bit because I didn't pull their names out of the book, but you did a pretty good job of the folks in the government who are still, some of them still aren't on board, but they were dragged kicking and screaming. Have any of them still, is everybody still, even after this phase 3 study, the folks, I'm not going to call them boogeymen in this book because they obviously believe what they believe, but still to this day, you still have people who are like, can't agree with these results.
Well, one really interesting character that I think is a great person to highlight in just the way that there is no sort of black and white, good guys, bad guys, or like, this is right, this is wrong. So Frank Sapienza was the DEA agent who basically was tasked with like putting together the case in 1985 and 86 to, quote unquote, prove that MDMA should be Schedule 1. And I did interview Frank for the book, and he's retired from the DEA. He now does a consultancy. And he really was like, yeah, no, I think we were right. No, MDMA is a dangerous drug. I stand by that. I think we're right. Like, we made the right decision. We were like shocked when all these therapists and doctors showed up, but like, whatever, we were right. However, Frank is now working with Rick Doblin and with MAPS. Literally, he's contracting with them to help Rick and his colleagues put together a strategy for descheduling MDMA with the DEA. Yeah. So, I think Frank's whole thing, like right now we don't have the data. We need the data. And once we have the data, then we can deschedule it. It's just like this kind of like, I guess, government thinking that some people have, just really by the books. But yeah, there's a lot of people getting on board, as we saw at Psychedelic Science, the conference with, more than 10,000 people in attendance. There's great interest in this. It's growing every day, but there's definitely still holdouts. For this story I just published in the New York Times yesterday about the new clinical trial, I talked to people who were like, no. Wait,
you wrote that? That was your article?
Yeah.
Oh my God. No offense. I read the headline and I jumped into the article.
People don't read bylines.
I didn't read oh my God. I posted that all over the place yesterday.
That's awesome.
All right. Well,
good. I'm so happy you shared it. Well, whatever. I wrote it.
That's awesome.
I'm just the messenger.
Yeah.
But as you saw in that article, there was one doctor I quoted who was like, these results aren't like that impressive. This is a dangerous drug. And like his comments to me by email were also like, this is going to increase like demand for dangerous street MDMA and, but like millions of people are literally using this drug every year around the world. Like, I don't think this is going to happen.
One of my Whizisms is that there are some people that would complain it's not hot enough in hell. So you're just never going to, there's
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So breakthrough therapy, 2017, Rick's really moving the ball down. You know what? Let me ask you this question first. I don't know why I wrote it down towards the bottom of my card than the top. I want to get your take on this. Is it a psychedelic or not? Now I know you have to be Switzerland, or which one's neutral? Sweden? No, Switzerland. But as a human, and after all your research, where does it fall?
Yeah, honestly, I think there's kind of like a mic drop answer on this, which is a paper that was published in Nature earlier this year. And it was from a researcher from Johns Hopkins named Guldo Lin. She's doing like really amazing work. Like, she's the one who gave octopuses MDMA a few years ago that I'm sure a lot of people heard about. She's just like such an incredible thinker. Anyway, she did studies showing that on the most basic, like mechanistic biological level possible, which is DNA transcription, MDMA, ketamine, LSD, ibogaine, and psilocybin are all doing the same thing in a therapeutic context. And I think the fact that all of these seemingly different drugs are doing the same thing at that most basic molecular level shows that they are of the same category. And she had cocaine in there as a control, and it did not do this. So I would say that, yes, MDMA is a psychedelic, and it's a different type of psychedelic than something like LSD, but it's kind of like an apple and a pear or an apple and a banana are really different, but they're still just fruit.
I love how you wrote in the book that even the word empathogen it sounded cool, but then it sounds a little cancerous or something like that. But
yeah, exactly.
The fact that MDMA allows you to, it breaks down the amygdala, the fight or flight, especially with veterans, right? Or first responders. We're either fighting or we're flying type of thing.
Yeah.
So I love that answer. That's pretty cool. Let's talk about risk, because you do a great job in here, especially with the history. I mean, whether it was Great Britain or Joe Biden as a senator, they were they outlawed, like, this is like the movie Footloose. They outlawed like raves. They outlawed like pacifiers or anything.
Pacifiers. That's a great glow sticks.
Yeah.
Glow sticks.
That's a subversive type of thing. So, but talk about risk, because one of my stickies here is like the British guy who's like,
oh gosh,
it's more dangerous driving to the rave than what was going on at the rave.
Totally.
So there's risk in everything, folks. But in MDMA, like in a MAPS trial or doing therapeutically, there's not that much risk. There's risk in everything. Let's get our attorneys paid, but it's not that risky, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, we have to draw a really hard line between doing MDMA therapeutically in a clinical trial, like legally, and doing MDMA underground, whether that's like an underground therapist or at a rave. So in these clinical trials, you know exactly what you're getting and you know exactly the dose. So there's no chance of like adulteration or taking too much of the drug. And you're being monitored with like a team of professionals. Like there's extremely little risk there from the MDMA itself. Like the risk of like psychological issues that you deal with, like that's another thing, but that's not the MDMA.
Sure.
Okay. Out in the world, like in an underground therapy setting or in a rave setting, there's a lot more risk because you're having to get your drugs illegally. You're having to go to the black market. So unless you do your own testing, you don't know like what adulterants are potentially in there. Yeah. Or like, you don't know if your sample is like 60% pure MDMA or 100% pure, which can like mess up your dosing and you can potentially take too much.
Yes.
But even with those like risks there in the illegal context, MDMA is still really not that risky based on like the number of hospitalizations and the number of deaths that we see. Like, yes, a handful of people do continue to die each year, but oftentimes it's tied to adulterated drugs. It's tied to mixing drugs with MDMA, including alcohol, or taking too much MDMA. And it's tied to behaviors like going to a rave and dancing nonstop and not drinking water and overeating.
Yeah. Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's technically the MDMA isn't the risk. It's what's surrounding it that is the risk.
It's the prohibition and it's the lack of knowledge that people have about how to behave on MDMA and, you know, how to safely take it. And like that lack of knowledge is because we can't acknowledge illegal drug use.
You can't talk about it. Yeah,
exactly. But
I mean, how many times in the history of our republic, folks, do we know that prohibition doesn't work? It does the exact opposite.
Yeah. And we just keep hammering away at it.
And it's more dangerous, as you point out. If this thing was above ground and legal, it's tested. It's, the Merck stamp of approval, whatever it is, as opposed to, I don't know where the stuff's coming from and it might kill me.
Totally.
Okay. So chapter 12, and you kind of brought up the octopus thing is funny. We really are a social species. And I'm glad you brought the way you you talked about the Dallas Club and everything. I felt like I was there, right? And it was very nice. MDMA, you love everybody, man. You know, black, white, brown, no sex, whoever cares. We are all one. It's a sense of community, right? And I love that you brought this down and the octopus study, folks. You got to read it just to read it, because I'm like, they gave MDMA to is it octopi or octopuses?
That's a great question. It's one that is one of debate. I won't like bog you down in that. Yeah, you can pick whichever one you want.
Octopi. So you got to read it, because octopi, who aren't two social animals, the MDMA worked on these people. So a couple things I want to go down this rabbit hole with the social species. The first thing for me, for veterans, is that loss of community, that loss of squadron, right? We leave the military. I went from a fighter squadron where you trusted the gals and the guys in there with your life, or they weren't there anymore. And I went to a Wall Street firm where, you had to keep your eye on your wallet. I mean, these people would push their mother in front of a bus for $1 type of thing. Whereas MDMA kind of brought back that, hey, we're all one people. Talk to this though, because this really hit home. And I was blown away when I read this in your book, because I do have two nephews that are on the spectrum and autistic. Talk to us about MDMA and autism, or people who are introverts or feel socially awkward. This did not expect to read this in an MDMA book. So if you're listening and this, sit up straight, because this is really cool.
Yeah. Okay. So as we talked about earlier, MDMA like lowers activity in your amygdala, your fear center, which, you know, maybe that is related to PTSD, but that can also be your fear of just talking to people.
Crowds.
If you have, if you have social anxiety, if you're shy. So the autistic community on its own has discovered MDMA as a tool for socializing. So, you know, go to a club, go to a party, you know, or whatever, just hanging out with friends, do some MDMA. Suddenly you're opened up and you can talk freely and you don't feel awkward. You're not like, oh God, how are they judging me? Am I coming off as weird? Whatever. And then people can take what they have observed in themselves while they were on the MDMA and apply that to their sober life. Because, you know, you want to be doing MDMA at very most like once every 3 or 4 months in like an ideal setting. Not, you know, you don't want to be doing MDMA every time you talk to someone. But whether you're autistic or, you know, you're not. I talked to a shy friend, for example, who has done this himself and to great results. You can use MDMA as a tool to just practice being social, seeing yourself getting this great success. People like are, you know, into your conversation, you know, they're not like judging you, and then just try it out in your sober life. And this is more than just anecdotal evidence. So there was a small study done at UCLA on autistic adults with severe social anxiety. So this is social anxiety that's really, you know, holding them back in their lives. And the results were just stunning. After the trial, like people's lives changed. Like one guy got married, one person finished college, a morbidly obese person lost a ton of weight. And incredibly, one of the participants even became a public speaker.
Yes.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So I think there's just like really interesting avenues that MDMA could be used for in terms of just like getting us to connect with each other and, you know, not be so afraid of being judged and afraid of the other.
And it's incredible because what's my buddy? It's I was in DC walking around, you know, walking halls of Congress talking about this stuff. An active duty police lieutenant from the town just north of Boston went through the MDMA thing.
Oh, wow. That's so great.
Yeah, exactly. So could you imagine having a police officer respond who's actually empathetic and just kind of loving and caring instead of, you know, busting heads open? So
just imagine.
The social aspect of this is great. So people with autism or just social anxiety disorder, it shows you that it breaks down some of the barriers you might be facing. Now, let's talk about, there's a ton of other stuff in here. Maybe I even have you back, but I love Gabor. Is it Mott or Mate? Gabor? I
think it's Gabor Mate.
Gabor Mate.
Like a mate, like
a coffee.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I got to be honest with you. After being in space for a while and knowing who he is and just watching his holy Batman of brains.
Yeah.
I didn't dig into a lot of what his work until you did on addiction.
Yeah.
You kind of broke open the, hey man, because a lot of people do what? Like, oh, my dad was a drunk, so I'm a drunk too. It's like, it might not necessarily be in the genes. So give us the cliff notes of your talks with him and how it relates to MDMA. Because I was blown away. I'm like, holy shit, I need to know more about this guy and his work.
Yeah, I would urge anyone who's interested in hearing more about the addiction stuff to read Gabor Mate's book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Really, it was just like mind blowing for me. So his working hypothesis is that, you know, behind virtually all substance use disorders, addictions is trauma, you know, and he's found in his patients that, you know, there's various reasons that people are pushed towards substances, but it's all trauma oriented. So, you know, you're trying to like deaden the pain. You're trying to find love where, you know, to fill that hole of emptiness. You're trying to find community with other drug users. So, but all of these different reasons that people reach out to substances is driven by, you know, some sort of ultimate trauma and
your environment too. Yeah. Your environment.
Yeah. Your environment as well. Yeah. You're living in like, you know, socioeconomic despair, you know,
that's trauma.
All that stuff. Yeah. And something that a psychiatrist I interviewed named Ben Sussa also pointed out that was really eye-opening to me is if you are coming from a place without trauma, you have like a solid background, you had like stable relationships growing up, and you do get addicted to a substance like alcohol or, whatever it is, typically you can relatively easily break yourself of that addiction. You can go to therapy, you can go to whatever service, and you can get through it and then just return to your life.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas people who don't address that underlying trauma, that's why they just keep coming back and back and back.
Correct.
And, that addiction prevails.
And folks, I'm begging you to please read this book, because Rachel does a great job of, and hey man, I'm the first one to admit when I've been wrong in the past. Addicts, I'm like, dude, you're just weak, or you're just,
Totally.
The condescending attitude towards somebody with addiction.
Yeah.
When it wasn't genetic necessarily. It's something shitty, man. How about a little empathy instead of looking down your nose at them?
It's a vicious cycle that just makes it worse and worse.
Yeah,
like locking people up for that is like literally the worst thing you could do. That's the
exact opposite of what you should be doing. This is a separate conversation, but I'm probably not going to blow you away, but I blow away a lot of my listeners when I say this. I got to be honest with you. Criminals, convicts, when you're let out of jail, you should do an MDMA journey or a medicine journey to show you that you're not that, right? You want to reduce recidivism of people get this revolving door, heal them. People are like, you want to give drugs to convicts? I'm like, nah, I want to heal these people.
Totally.
Because
absolutely.
I longer talk, my ibogaine experience, my ibogaine, the stuff that I've done when I was with whatever word you want to use, God, source, truth, divine. I choose God. God's like, Matthew, I don't make imperfect objects. You are absolutely perfect. It's 54 years of crap, man. This is this bright shining light. If we could do that, this world would be a much better place. And I love how you broke down with Gabor that to date we haven't found an addiction gene, right? So just because
absolutely not.
Your mom was an alcoholic doesn't mean you're going to be. So stop that.
Absolutely
stop
not.
listening to that crap, right?
Absolutely not. Yeah, the only genes that we have found that are correlated are basically how sensitive you are, how sensitive and feeling, how deeply feeling. And one thing that Gabor Mate says is, convicts who he goes and works with, murderers, hardened criminals are some of the most sensitive people he's ever met.
Precisely, man. Because some of them are still in that childlike state. They never got to grow up. They didn't go to high school or whatever it was. Or I love that. And not to get too religious, but health. The guy that shot John Paul II, he went to prison and forgave that guy, right? Whether you believe in Jesus or any of that stuff in the Bible, it's like, hey man, you got to love the least that you do to the least of my brothers, you're doing to me. So anyway, we'll get off that. But let's go to now I'm really going to put you on the spot. I got to be honest. Rachel, when we were walking around Psych Science, certain people, I'm like, they're either feds or they're big pharma. And actually, in reality, it might be both, right? So let me get your take on this, because Rick Doblin, I swear, is just, he's incredible, because he's like, I don't want people to profit off this. Healing, I always say this, healing should be free, and technically it is free. You can, you can't patent a root and you can't trademark a toad. Totally. But talk to me about this chemistry stuff, man, because I'm terrified that big pharma is going to jump in with size 12 boots and 10 grand for an insulin pen or whatever. It's 50 grand for MDMA therapy. Give us your what's the future look in this landscape? Is Rick going to win and kind of make this really cheap, or what's it look like? Give me your future picture.
So I'll talk just to MDMA because I don't think we have time, and I don't have enough knowledge really to delve into the whole psychedelics landscape. There's a lot more, I will say, like patent wars going on for all kinds of other molecules, because Rick went out of his way to ensure that MDMA could never be patented. This was like a specific strategy he had over a decade ago, because, Merck's patent had ran out long ago, but MDMA could have still been patented for specific things like, alcoholism, trauma, whatever. Yeah. And Rick got around that by publishing everything he possibly could about all of MDMA's potential uses, so that no one could claim to have discovered something new. However, it costs millions and millions, up to $1 billion, to get a drug to market, to get it through the clinical trials, and that's one of the reasons, in addition to all the bureaucratic red tape around working with a banned substance, that it's taken MAPS so very long to get through this process. I mean, they started with the PTSD stuff in 2001, over 20 years ago. And a lot of the time is because they've literally been paying for all this research through fundraising, just through donation.
It ain't cheap, folks. Studies and salaries and
hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah, exactly. So Rick really wanted to get through this whole thing only on, the nonprofit
donations,
status. On donations. But, a few years ago, they had to sort of face reality, with the country and the landscape and the economics we live with. And they split MAPS into, they created a new organization called MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. It was a wholly owned subsidiary of MAPS, but actually, as of yesterday, they just sold equity in the company. And that was, I actually talked to Rick on the phone about it. It was just this really difficult decision that everyone was sort of forced to make, because people have stopped giving donations for psychedelics, because now everyone wants to invest as investors. They want to have a return on their money. Correct. Nobody wants to be altruistic, because this is just the capitalist world we live in. So
agreed. Yep.
MAPS PBC says they are committed to ensuring MDMA-assisted therapy reaches everyone who needs it or wants it. They're working really hard with various payers, from insurance companies to Medicare and Medicaid. The VA's got their whole thing going on right now. And MAPS also says that they're going to create a patient access program, so that even if you don't have insurance and you can't pay out of pocket, you can get it. But
I love it.
I love it too. I'm just like, given the world we live in, I'm going to be standing by to see how it works out. And I really, really hope it works out. But we'll see.
You know what? That's, you and me both sound a little jaded, because we know how this country works. This ain't our first rodeo. And big pharma, because Rachel, as you know, one of the Navy SEALs I did the medicine with initially, he's like, Whiz, I was on 15 meds, man, 5 to wake up, 5 for lunch, 5 to go to bed. And since the ibogaine treatment, he hasn't taken one. So this has to be a threat to big pharma. A guy like Rick leading with his heart, saying, I just want to heal people. And the Indians circling around the cowboys going, I want to make money. So let's all, and I get it when he said, hey, we launched MAPS PBC. Money doesn't come out of thin air, but the way they structured, I work in the investment community. The way I read all his stuff, it sounds like it's still super altruistic. Like the mouse has to eat the cheese, the rocket fires, and only then can you make a little bit of profit. And however it's structured, he did it perfectly. Like, it's a quote for profit, but the profit's going this way and to help more people. I mean, definitely, I think their core mission remains
very, very virtuous. But I really hope that, now that they have had to sell some equity, that, investor pressure and lawyers and everything else doesn't start to really kind of muddy the waters. But we will see.
I think the good thing with this, Rachel, is the fact that everybody has seen the start of this. It was therapeutic. It is therapeutic. It's helping all these results. And if somebody does try to go super, James Bond evil demon on this, there's going to be a pretty big backlash, but some of these people on Wall Street, they're not going to care about that. A couple other things to cover real quick is I forget the guy's name that you detailed, but after doing this MDMA therapy and whatever definition of the word healed you want to use, especially the lady who's, mom killed the lady in oh my God, that was devastating. Jesus God.
Yeah. Her story was like, it wouldn't even work as a movie.
No.
It was like too many bad things happened.
No. Oh, it was God. It was devastating. I'm so glad she's doing better. But what I'm getting at is people, after they go through this therapy, that my saying is they want to put the ladder down. Like when I came back after my medicine work, I'm like, I gotta tell people. I jokingly tell people this is the world's best Ponzi scheme, because people are like, I gotta tell people. I gotta put the ladder down. So it's this, folks, this medicine work potentially. And let me again pay the attorneys real quick, folks. This isn't for everybody, right? You can walk on the beach, you can meditate, you can climb to the top of Mount Everest.
Definitely.
There are so many, for as many humans on this planet, there's that many modalities to potentially heal. But this, especially like we were talking about some people in this study, like untreatable, treated.
Yeah.
Holy crap, man. So I love the fact that you detail in your book that, hey, all these people, the majority of these people that you talk about were like, I got to put down that this is the rest of my life. The one lady, again, don't know her name, but I think it was the British lady whose daughter died. She's like the biggest proponent of testing and legal if it's underground. So there are so many, again, I can't recommend this enough, folks. We were taking our middle son Jack out to CU Boulder. We dropped him off, and I read this thing on the air. I did not put it down, folks. So you're not going to put it down.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you a couple things that it's all the rage right now. Like I microdose psilocybin. Have you ever heard of microdosing it? Obviously, you can take minute amount, but sub-perceptual. Is there any talk on microdosing MDMA?
So I got that question a lot when I was doing book talks, and I've also just heard people anecdotally say they do. I really want to urge people not to do that because, MDMA just doesn't work the same as a classic psychedelic like LSD or psilocybin. You could be damaging your serotonin nerves if you're just doing it all the time. Yes. That's why the point of the rule of thumb is to wait and do it quarterly, like once every 3 or 4 months at most. You shouldn't be doing it every day. And there just hasn't been any research done on what you're doing to your brain if you're taking little pinches of MDMA every day, especially with your serotonin system. The other reason I just don't think it makes much sense is because MDMA, unless you kind of get where you're going, you do a full dose and you get to this nice plateau state, for some people going up to that plateau state, or maybe that cruising altitude, if we want to bring it back to fighter pilots.
Aviation.
You can encounter some turbulence. And MAPS found this out in their phase 2 trials. So they were trying to solve the issue of the placebo. So, if you're on a psychedelic drug, usually you can tell you're on a psychedelic drug. And if you want to do blind studies, that's a problem. So they tried to give people either an inactive placebo, a small dose of MDMA that would kind of get them up, but it wouldn't reach that cruising altitude, or a full dose. And the people in the middle group actually did worse than the people with the placebo because they were oh my God, what is this? Where is this going? This, I feel really anxious. I feel really nervous. I feel agitated. This isn't going anywhere. What is, So MDMA doesn't feel good unless you kind of get where you're trying to go.
I'm so glad you brought this up. I forgot you wrote that in the book. I'm that makes sense. Either on or off.
Exactly. There shouldn't be a middle ground for MDMA. So I would just urge people again, not to microdose, either do it or don't.
And let me tell you that I love the way you describe that because I'm going to use a 5-MeO DMT analogy. My first 5-MeO experience, hey, countdown from 10. I didn't even get to 8 before I exploded into love, light, energy.
Wow.
Separate conversation. I'm bringing this up because I went from 0 to infinity in the blink of an eye.
Oh my God.
I sat with the medicine again. You ready for this? 8 months later. And I couldn't go supersonic. I was hitting, it was incredibly frustrating. And I was it sucked. It was not good, man. I could not go supersonic and I was bumping up against it. And so that's a great analogy. Either on or off, let's not microdose this stuff. I love that. All right. Now, and then we're coming up on our time here. I wanted to save this to the end because this just tells you how good Rachel is at her work here. Let me just read this. As his psychic explorations deepened, Shulgin became completely convinced that there is a wealth of information built into us with miles of intuitive knowledge tucked away in the genetic material of every one of our cells, and close quote. And then this is you, because I want to read this. Access to the interior universe is normally barred, however, for those who haven't devoted a lifetime to meditation or other practices for reaching transcendence. The gift of psychedelic drugs, Shulgin recognized, is that they give anyone a clear route of entry to the fathoms of the mind, an expressway to the profound that may lend answers to the deepest questions of existence, selfhood, and consciousness. It really is all in our heads, though it's up to the individual to choose whether to use such drugs as mere entertainment or as keys for unlocking cryptic realms of being and meaning. Mic drop. Bro, that was epic. I
gotta say, I love that you picked out those sentences, because I can't tell you. I think I spent like 45 minutes workshopping those sentences. So
are you serious?
You for the recognition. Yeah. The entire sentences in that book, those were the ones that took me the longest. Thank you.
Dude, that's a God moment, man.
Yeah.
I highlighted that one. And last night as I was,
nice.
I don't prepare for these things, folks, clearly. I prepared for this one. And that was, nice. I'm like, and I wrote that right there. I wrote end on it. I'm like, end podcast with that quote. So
nice.
Rachel,
beautiful.
It's so great to meet you.
Yeah, it was so fun chatting.
We're going to see each other obviously in the future here, because my mission aligns with all of your research. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said, I feel love. You won't put it down. It is tied for first in my life right now with How to Change Your Mind and the Immortality Key. Very well thought out, researched. She's got some funnies in there, the science, and it's just incredible. So Rachel, thanks for being on here. We're going to have you back. And especially,
sure thing. I'm around.
A final, real quick, in 30 seconds or less, give us the over under. FDA, MDMA, legal for therapeutic use, fill in the blank. When?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully by this time next year.
This time next year, I'm going to hold you to it.
Stand by. Yeah, the government has like a fun way of delaying things. So we'll
12
see,
months, a year. This
if
time
all
next
goes
year.
well, this time next year, or even a little bit earlier. We'll see. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's the expert right there, folks. So again, thank you, Rachel, for joining us. I Feel Love. You have got to order it right now on Amazon or wherever cool people buy books. Have a great rest of your day. Happy hunting. Make sure you hedge. Fights on. Namaste and basi basi. We're out.